It's the people you thought you knew, like you've never seen them before. The power.
He operates within his own country where he is like a god.
The disaster.
I was shocked. It was looking like in German concentration camps.
The unexpected.
The individual is so bizarre, it's impossible to predict his actions.
Kim Jong Il, next on Biography. He may be developing weapons of mass destruction. He's tossed international weapons inspectors out of North Korea.
They've taken steps to activate their nuclear weapons program. That is serious.
He may already have 2 nuclear weapons, with his eye on even more.
They are less than 6 months from having 5 or 6 nuclear weapons.
When you have nuclear weapons and you have artillery that can set Seoul on fire, it's a very dangerous scenario.
And Kim Jong Il may be threatening the world with them.
The North Korean regime seems to believe that the way to get people to engage with it is to try and blackmail them into it.
That is how authoritarian regimes exist, because they have arbitrary power and they terrorize people, and their unpredictability is what is terrorizing about it.
Is he a madman? A lunatic?
If we deal with Kim Jong Il as a madman, crazy man, and not very bright person, we are totally wrong. He is crazy like fox. He's a very shrewd calculator and he's a strategic thinker.
Kim Jong Il rules a country on the edge of starvation with an iron hand. Now he may have nuclear weapons. The question is, what would Kim Jong Il do with them? Is his weapons buildup a threat of war, or a desperate attempt to be taken more seriously on the world stage? It's impossible to be certain about almost anything in Kim Jong Il's life. Different, often opposite stories abound, and they start as early as the day he was born.
One is the official North Korean propaganda story, which is that he was born at a secret revolutionary base camp run by his father on the base of the holy mountain of Paektu on the border between North Korea and China, or between Korea and China. On February 16, 1942, there was a double rainbow that came up in the sky. The flowers bloomed in the middle of winter, all to herald the birth of the next great leader of North Korea.
In fact, we now know he was born literally in a hovel in the Soviet Union while his family was under Soviet protection. So this is a man with this heroic myth, and the reality is in very stark contrast indeed.
At the time of Kim's birth in 1942, his father, Kim Il-sung, was a commander of the Soviet Army, trained in guerrilla warfare by the Russians in Siberia. Kim's mother, Kim Jong-suk, was a member of Kim Il-sung's army.
We don't really know much about her early years, except that she was apparently a very dedicated communist and a good wife and support to Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung spent most of his guerrilla career in China. But at the very end of this, in the fall of 1940, the Japanese basically pushed out these guerrillas into Russia, into the Soviet Far East, and that's when Kim Il-sung ended up in Siberia and became a member of the Soviet Army for the last 4 or 5 years of the war.
At the end of World War II, the Soviets sent Kim Il-sung and his family back to Korea. Russia controlled North Korea, and because of his loyalty to the Soviet Army, they put him in charge. He set up a rigid totalitarian government and became the great leader, worshipped and feared.
Kim Il-sung was the founder of the North Korean Republic. He was blessed both by Chinese and Russians, and he was a very charismatic ruler, and he was a shrewd strategic thinker and very able person.
Everyone who knew him or saw him, even those who despised him and lived to talk about it later, say that he did have a great aura of charisma. He had a great presence.
And as for his son, Kim Jong Il, there were acts of evil attached to his name soon after his birth. A terrifying story links him to the death of his own brother, who drowned at the age of 2.
When they fell into the water, he came up first, and when his brother tried to raise his head, he kept pushing his head under. Another report said he was laughing as he was hearing his brother going blub, blub, blub.
There's no way to know for sure. It just feeds a little bit too well into this idea that he was an evil guy from the very beginning.
A lot of these reports come to us filtered through South Korean intelligence, who had at that time a vested interest in conveying a rather negative image of him. That his brother died during this episode seems clear, and whether he actively killed him or it occurred on his watch, in either case it had to have really very wounding effects on him psychologically.
More wounds followed. In 1949, the same year his father was named chairman of the Korean Workers' Party, young Kim's mother died suddenly in childbirth. But the death of his mother is not even recorded in North Korea's official biography. It is as if she never died.
There's kind of an image that she's still alive. She's still the mother of Korea.
She was a key figure as his mother, somebody he loved, and whose stature he has been polishing, furbishing as the mother of the revolution.
Kim was just 8 when his mother died. And his father was no comfort. Kim Il-sung was a distant figure, obsessed with consolidating his power over North Korea. Then came the Korean War. On June 25, 1950, Kim Il-sung invaded South Korea. His dream was to unite the two countries under his control. But the United States joined forces with South Korea. Then China joined forces with North Korea.
If it had not been for the American intervention, Kim Il-sung could have very easily conquered all of South Korea.
The Korean War ended 3 years later in a stalemate, after the loss of 3 million lives. The Koreas remained divided by a demilitarized zone along the 38th parallel. But Kim Il-sung still claimed victory.
This is portrayed in the official propaganda as a war to liberate the South, and that it was a victory because the Americans, the North Koreans say, wanted to conquer North Korea, so the North Koreans blocked them from doing that.
Within North Korea, Kim Il-sung's power was brutal, absolute, and unchallenged.
In fact, by 1956, 3 years after the war ended, he staged a number of open purge trials of his rivals, resulting in those individuals in a couple of important cases being executed. And from that point onward, Kim Il-sung established really a cult of personality in North Korea, which would have made Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin blush.
His name, I think, was not Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung was actually a name known in legend in Korea, and I think he described himself as Kim Il-sung. It would be a little bit like someone showing up and saying, "I'm Robin Hood." It has the same kind of heroic ring.
Kim Jong Il spent the years of the Korean War in China. But on his return to North Korea, he was privy to wealth and privileges unknown to most North Koreans.
Kim Jong-il, in many ways, was pampered, was treated very deferentially, almost as the son of God.
As a teen, Kim seemed physically awkward. He did not have his father's good looks. He was small and not very athletic, but he lived the life of royalty, attending the finest schools and then Kim Il-sung University.
He was never disciplined. He was treated as the prince, which meant that he has always felt that he could do what he has wanted to do.
At the university, Kim Jong-il fell in love with a young literature major and married soon after.
There's a lot of different stories. There are stories that he was married and divorced 3 times. The person who appears to be his first wife he did meet in college at Kim Il-sung University.
That would be the official marriage. As far as I'm aware, he has 2 unofficial spouses. There was Song Hye-rim, who was North Korea's movie star, #1 actress all the way through the 1960s. And from that union came a son, Kim Jong-nam, born in 1971. As soon as a woman has a son, it doesn't matter whether you're officially married or not. It's of no importance that the woman who has the eldest son has legitimacy as a wife.
It's never been quite clear how many wives or mistresses or whatever Kim Jong-il has had.
All that is kept very private and very secret, and nobody is to talk about Kim Jong-il's private life.
After graduation, Kim Jong-il joined his father's world. First, he was made deputy director of the Propaganda and Agitation Department. But it turned out Kim Jong-il was crazy about movies. He also became deputy director of the Department of Culture and Arts.
That's what he seems to really like. He started out very early producing plays and operas, and especially films. Films seem to be his real passion.
With movies, Kim Jong-il could rewrite the story of his country. And it wouldn't be too long before he would try to script the rest of the world, too. By the early 1970s, Kim Il-sung was still the absolute ruler of North Korea, with a powerful army, and as it now appears, a growing interest in nuclear weapons. But it was becoming clear that the North Korean dictator was grooming his son, Kim Jong-il, as his heir apparent.
Kim Il-sung seems to have understood that communist systems had one major flaw, and that was the question of succession. Once a really powerful leader died, then there was a struggle for power to come after him. The best way to ensure Kim Il-sung's continued influence over Korea, even after his death, was to pass on power to his eldest son in this traditional, Korean Confucian manner.
Kim Jong-il began to consolidate his own power. He ousted old-time party officials, replacing them with younger members loyal to him. And even as his father remained the great leader, Kim Jong-il began to take over the day-to-day affairs of government. And one big task, to develop his father's ideology of Juche.
It means self-reliance, and of course, what that leads to is a government which is attempting to end any dependence on any other nation in the international community, viewing this as the best way to ensure its own self-government, its own independence, and its own sovereignty.
But he wasn't a public figure yet. And then in 1974, there were these mysterious reports in the North Korean media referring to something called the Party Center. The Party Center was doing this, the Party Center ordered that, and it began to be clear that the Party Center referred to the younger Kim Jong-il.
But Kim Jong-il's true fascination was with the arts. He is credited with directing 5 operas, and he wrote books on opera and film. This film book was very un-Hollywood. It had chapter titles like "The Director is the Commander of the Creative Group" and "Be Loyal to the Party and Prove Yourself Worthy of the Trust it places in you." Kim Jong-il's obsession with movies had him overseeing every film made in North Korea, and his personal home video library was reported to contain 20,000, mainly Western films.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
The Godfather, James Bond.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
And the Friday the 13th series were reported to be some of Kim Jong-il's favorites. Kim Jong-il was so desperate to become a movie mogul, he orchestrated a bizarre escapade right out of a screenplay. In 1978, he ordered the kidnapping of one of South Korea's biggest movie stars, Chae Eun-hee.
I was forcefully taken onto a boat and was told that I was being taken to North Korea. At that point, I fainted from shock. And when I woke up, I was in a huge ship. I cried hysterically and asked where they were taking me. I told them that I had family that depended on me back in South Korea. But I was told that I had to go meet Kim Jong Il.
6 months later, Kim Jong Il kidnapped her husband, movie director Shin Sang-ok.
I could not meet my wife even 6 months after my arrival there. I thought she was dead. So in December, I decided to escape by car. I was caught and brought back to Pyongyang by helicopter. Then I was put in another detention center. I attempted another escape and was caught again.
Shin spent 5 years in a high-security prison. He was only reunited with his wife when Kim Jong Il was ready to put the couple to work.
He wanted our cooperation and help in reigniting the movie industry in North Korea. And we had no choice but to accept his proposal and then to work for him and appear in the movies in order to gain his trust and confidence.
One of the films they made together was Bulgasari, a tale of a monstrous hero made of metal who would lead the people against an invading army. Kim thought Shin could help him produce movies that would glorify the Korean Workers' Party.
They gave me money. They treated me well, and I was allowed to travel to the outside world whenever I wanted, though with a bodyguard. But one very important thing was that all of this could stop if Kim Jong Il wished it. So that's not freedom. My freedom was in Kim Jong Il's hands and dependent on his whims. I did not have absolute freedom.
Through the 1970s, Kim Jong Il continued his rise to power. In 1980, in the Sixth Party Congress, he was raised to a party level only his father exceeded.
So it's at that point, 1980, that Kim Jong Il clearly became the heir apparent to Kim Il-sung. And then things really took off from there. All these biographies were produced of him. Propaganda about him just exploded within North Korea and foreign press coming out from North Korea.
Now, Kim Jong Il was portrayed as the dear leader. He was reported by those who met him to be living a life any potentate would have envied. He was described as a playboy and a man who loved to throw lavish parties with barrels of cognac. And he was also described as a swaggering hothead. He stood just 5'2". Self-conscious about his appearance, Kim would wear 4-inch lifts and a bouffant hairstyle just to add some height.
He has an appearance complex. He's short and fat, and so in trying to cover that up, he wears high heels and other gear to camouflage his shortcomings. He tries to be trendy, but maybe at times it doesn't come out right. The problem is there is no one to tell him that. No one dares.
Chae Un-hee and Shin Sang-ok escaped North Korea 8 years after their capture, but Kim Jong-il's reign of terror had just begun. It is believed that Kim was the mastermind behind the 1983 bombing in Rangoon, Burma, which killed 17 South Korean officials. South Korean President Jong II narrowly escaped death. The aim was to demoralize the South Koreans, so far ahead of North Korea economically and far more prominent on the world stage.
That was a very crushing experience for the South Korean government.
A Korean Airlines jet carrying 115 people on a flight from Iraq vanished today somewhere near Burma.
And then on November 29, 1987, another act of terror. He was allegedly behind the bombing of a Korean Airlines flight, killing all 115 passengers on board. The apparent motive? To disrupt the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul.
He is a character to be reckoned with, who, like his father, is quite ruthless, but perhaps not as subtle, that believes in getting things done in a very direct way.
I think you have a person who has absolute power within his own circle, and so I think if he decides that terrorism is the way to go, it's something that he can direct, and his orders will be followed.
As the 90s arrived, Kim Jong Il was still living the Stalinist model for dictator, but with far more dangerous tools at his disposal. Even as he gained power over North Korea in his father's final years, Kim Jong Il, either by his own choice or on the orders of others, remained a leader hidden from sight, a mystery. His eccentric persona and reputation for violence made for great copy. He was often portrayed as an evil villain straight out of James Bond. Korea watchers feel that the truth was far more complicated and potentially dangerous.
He's a clever thinker, utterly brutal, has some of the characteristics of a spoiled older son, formidable opponent.
Wacko, but dangerous, has done some very, very strange things in his life.
I think that he is rational. I do think he's cunning. I think that he is somebody who clearly enjoys the pleasures of life and pretends that he is ascetic.
In North Korea, power is personal and absolute. Kim Jong Il combined threats with calculated diplomatic retreats to achieve his ends. He was his father's son.
It is a highly personalized, personalistic way of making decisions, often on the spot. Kim Il-sung used to call it on-the-spot guidance, and so does, at times, Kim Jong-il.
It's the political vortex in Korea. It goes up to the top. All power rests here.
This was a man who was sure of what he wanted and felt that only he could make the decisions that were necessary.
Kim Jong-il exercised total control over North Korea's vast military when he was appointed chairman of the National Defense Commission in 1991.
The North Koreans bring to bear a military force over 8 million strong, counting reserves.
That's an enormous force for a country the size of Pennsylvania. Most of the troops are poised for combat just miles from Seoul on Korea's demilitarized zone, or DMZ. The tension along the border is palpable.
The North Koreans have 12,000 artillery tubes across the demilitarized zone, capable of firing up to 500,000 rounds per hour for a sustained period.
Kim Jong-il's finger was also on North Korea's nuclear trigger. Scientists had been experimenting with nuclear technology for years.
North Korea has always used nuclear weapons, nuclear development, uranium enrichment as their main card. That is their big card, the fact that they may have 2 nuclear weapons.
As Kim Jong-il prepared to take over control of the country from his father in 1994, North Korea's nuclear weapons program was exposed. To the United States, it was a direct and imminent threat.
The situation in Korea is serious, and we have responded in a serious way.
As South Korea prepared for a devastating strike from the north, the Clinton administration ordered Secretary of Defense William Perry to prepare plans for a surprise attack.
We were building up our forces quietly in South Korea and off the coast. And I think it was as close as we came to what would have been an extremely bloody conflict. We would have won in the end, but there would have been huge casualties, including among Americans.
The North Koreans, meanwhile, threatened to turn Seoul into a sea of fire.
The area from the demilitarized zone to Seoul and possibly beyond would be devastated. Casualties, I think casualties could easily run into the range of 5 million.
Negotiations with the North Korean regime are notoriously difficult and always based on the will of the leader.
You cannot negotiate with North Koreans. They read from talking points. And any kind of negotiation or any kind of change to those talking points requires the dear leader's acceptance.
In June of 1994, with both North Korea and the United States refusing to back down, former President Jimmy Carter was able to negotiate a deal acceptable to both sides. In return for much-needed heating oil and nuclear reactors used only for electricity, North Korea stopped its nuclear weapons program, temporarily.
We stopped them from producing hundreds of nuclear weapons over time. We stopped that. Stopped it cold at almost no cost.
But North Korea also gave up almost nothing while gaining much-needed aid. Although not yet fully in charge, it was Kim Jong Il's first experience with high-stakes nuclear brinksmanship. A month after the nuclear crisis was resolved, on July 8, 1994, Kim Il-sung, the founder of the North Korean state, died. His passing was the end of an era and a day of great mourning in North Korea. It was a day when even animals wept, according to North Korean sources.
The death of his father was a major challenge for Kim Jong Il. He never did assume his father's role of president. His father is eternal president, beaming down his guidance to the country.
Kim Jong Il, known to his country as Dear Leader, did not assume his father's title and positions until nearly 3 years after his father's death. First, he had to build his own cult of personality. His picture and his words are everywhere.
In North Korea, everything is the dear leader. The great leader now he's become. The banners, the slogans.
I mean, it must be very weird to go through a town and see statues of yourself all the time, or statues of your father, and be called the dear leader or the great leader, and have everybody wear your image on their lapel.
The dear leader's position as the unchallenged leader of Korea, really glorified and central to all policies in the North, has been something that continues today and has been built upon, of course, by his son, Kim Jong Il.
But building a cult around a leader who had almost never spoken publicly had been a challenge.
To this day, I don't know that Kim Jong Il has actually made a speech to the people.
Glory to the officers and soldiers of the revolution.
This brief remark is believed to have been his first and one of the few made to the North Korean public. But the glorification never stops. In 1982, Kim Jong Il's birthday became an official holiday, and in 1995, it became a 2-day national celebration. The capital city of Pyongyang is a testament to the political power of Kim Jong Il and his father, and a monument to their cult of personality.
During the Korean War, Pyongyang was basically reduced to rubble by American bombers. And it was then built up as a monumental city with tremendously broad boulevards with very little traffic. Big buildings in the Stalinist style, many of them.
But it's all a stage set, a facade, according to James Lilly, who toured the city in 1995.
We saw this 100-story hotel that was empty. Nothing worked in it. Elevators, water, anything. Empty, except for the first 3 floors.
One also gets a sense that there is no life in the city, that many of the apartment buildings probably have no one living in them. There isn't the kind of either street traffic or street noise that you would normally see.
The city remains the ultimate fantasy for Kim Jong Il.
The creation of the quite magnificent city of Pyongyang is a creation for his own self-delusion perpetuation.
The reality of the cities and countryside outside of Pyongyang is another story. It's a strange, sad tale that Kim Jong Il struggled mightily to keep from public view in the 1990s. But this news could not be controlled. Behind the pageantry, behind the monuments, is the North Korea that Kim Jong Il has attempted to hide. Kim Jong Il has kept North Korea in the dark, literally. It's a country so poor that a satellite photograph taken at night shows none of the bright lights obvious in South Korea. In 1995, even as Kim Jong Il continued to lavish money on the military, North Korea was hit hard by disaster. A crippling famine swept across the country, leaving no one untouched.
We've seen desperate cases of severe malnutrition. You see a lot of wasting, where their tiny little twig-like arms have just got folds of skin that are falling off. And then children with just heaving rib cages, very sad faces, apathetic, listless, vacant children that are close to death.
Despite Kim Jong Il's efforts to keep horrible conditions in the countryside far from public view, German physician Norbert Wollertson captured on video the desperate condition of local hospitals.
There's nothing inside, no medicine, no food. They can't even feed the doctors. They can't feed the patients. I was shocked when I saw those blue and white striped pajamas and was looking like in German concentration camps, like in Auschwitz or traveling camp.
At least 1 million people have died of starvation or starvation-related illnesses in the last 10 years, and maybe as many as 2 million, but we don't know.
But thousands of North Koreans have suffered horribly from very unnatural causes. Question Kim Jong Il's leadership, and a forced labor camp awaits. Satellite photos revealed many around the country.
The estimates for overall Korea run somewhere around 150 to 300,000 in these camps.
They are as bad as the worst gulags that ever existed in the old Soviet days. And that means digging, tunneling, mining, working 17-hour days. And many people die in the camps of exhaustion.
A former personal bodyguard of Kim Jong Il's, now a defector, suffered at one of North Korea's most brutal camps.
I was required to work 16 hours a day, and if I stopped, they would beat me with a large wooden club. The reason I have all of these scars is because I was beaten very badly. I lost the sight in my right eye, and most of my teeth were broken.
I've used the term malignant narcissism to characterize him because he's so caught up in his own grandiose self-image. He really can't empathize with the pain or suffering of others, including his own people.
Except in a quirky bit of fate, the plight of Pyongyang's traffic women. This was one cause that did move Kim Jong Il.
He saw a woman traffic policeman on a rather cold day in a uniform in which she would be cold. And he got very involved in great micromanaging detail in helping to design new uniforms which would keep these officers more comfortable.
But Kim Jong Il doesn't need popular support. Western aid provides the basis for his survival, and it's the illicit sale of arms and military technology around the world that keeps North Korea afloat.
Well, the mess starts with the North Koreans. They, in probably about 1997, undertook, at the suggestion of the Pakistanis, a secret uranium enrichment program to produce uranium enriched to the point that it could be usable in nuclear weapons.
As he restarted his secret nuclear program, Kim Jong Il slyly began a charm offensive with the goal of directing aid dollars into North Korea.
North Korea has started opening itself in a very slow, controlled way to the rest of the world. They most dramatically with South Korea, with the summit meeting of 2000.
The June 2000 summit in Pyongyang between Kim Jong Il and South Korean President Kim Dae-jung made headlines around the world. South Koreans were shocked by a Kim Jong Il they did not expect.
He was engaging, he was rational, he was talking to their leader, he was saying to South Koreans, let's get together. For a while, he became extremely popular in South Korea, to the point that the government was worried people were going overboard.
Later that year, Kim Jong Il was ready for his close-up.
What is interesting is in his clothes, he wears these kind of leisure suits that look more like a garage mechanic than a head of a country.
In October 2000, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright visited North Korea. It was a unique opportunity to meet Kim Jong Il face to face.
He lives in his own little world of what he imagines that North Korea really is. On the other hand, in having discussions with him, he is perfectly rational, and he is he's isolated but not uninformed.
Few Americans have ever met Kim Jong Il. Harold Coe also met with him as a member of Albright's party.
He gave us the impression of almost an aging rock star, trying to get our attention. And he was very much an impresario.
Kim Jong Il, at one point, staged an elaborate spectacle for his visitors.
There must have been 50 to 100,000 people on the ground, and they were doing one display after another. Absolutely extraordinary, perfectly timed exhibits.
While he had welcomed the occasional foreign dignitary to North Korea, Kim Jong Il had made few trips abroad. In 2001, he took a 24-day train trip across Russia with a Russian emissary who described official functions and lobster banquets.
They ate a lot of food, they drank a lot of wine and brandy. They had these gorgeous girls serving them.
Less than a year later, the party was over for Kim Jong Il.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that
Madeleine Albright had not had time to coordinate a summit conference with Bill Clinton, and a new crisis was brewing with a new presidential administration.
Within weeks after becoming president, President Bush announced that the United States would no longer work with the North Koreans and negotiate with them because the belief was that they weren't fulfilling their agreements.
states like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
This is the world's biggest proliferator of ballistic missiles. And their danger to the world is not just that they might use these capabilities, but that they would proliferate nuclear weapons and nuclear materials to other countries.
In a post-9/11 world, President Bush believed that there was little to distinguish Kim Jong Il from Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden.
One of the reasons why the people are starving is because the leader of North Korea hasn't seen to it that their economy is strong or that they be fed. And we've got a great heart, but I have no heart for somebody who starves his folks.
The North Koreans paid attention to that, and so far as they were concerned, it was a direct statement of what America's intentions were to North Korea to destroy that regime.
North Korean leadership basically came up with the conclusion, best defense is the best offense, so let's take the offensive route. That's the reason why they created another nuclear crisis.
Even with the crisis brewing, Kim Jong Il attempted to turn around old enemies. In 2002, 5 Japanese citizens were returned to their families. They were the survivors. Kim Jong Il admitted that North Korean agents had kidnapped more than 20 people off the streets of Japan during the 1970s to train North Korean operatives for duty in Japan. Yet as 2002 turned to 2003, the stakes became even higher. Kim Jong Il's reputation, and perhaps even his very survival, were on the line. Kim Jong Il was a virtual recluse on the international scene until just a few months ago.
Are you familiar with Kim Jong Il? Maybe you remember his father, mentally ill. Yes. You remember?
Now from David Letterman to the latest James Bond film, Kim Jong Il and North Korea have become a part of pop culture. In the summer of 2002, Kim Jong Il's regime protested the depiction of North Koreans as bad guys in Die Another Day. But that issue has been eclipsed by far greater concerns.
I mean, we have to be very clear about one thing about the North Korean nuclear weapons program. It's a real nuclear weapons program.
In October 2002, North Korea confessed to building a reactor to enrich uranium. In December, the regime expelled UN inspectors, and in January of 2003, it withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In February, it restarted a plant to process material suitable to arm nuclear weapons.
Very conservative estimates would yield them about 150 kilograms of plutonium every year. And a conservative estimate, that's about 30 weapons a year.
I think the greatest threat to the United States, the greatest threat to the world, is their nuclear program.
As the U.S. military focused its resolve on Iraq, another crisis loomed on the Korean peninsula. The question is, what does Kim Jong Il want? Nobody knows for sure.
I think that what they want, he and the cadre around him, is to have recognition from the United States, more than anything else.
I don't think there's any doubt that he wants money and oil and food in order to prop his regime up.
What North Korea wants is security assurance. That's what they want, because they want to live to see another day.
The White House response seemed aimed at Kim Jong Il directly.
And we will continue to work diplomatically to make it very clear to Kim Jong Il that should he expect any kind of aid and help for his people, that he must comply with the world's demand that he not develop a nuclear weapon.
What the United States is saying is that blackmail will not work. This is also not a problem between the United States and North Korea. This is a problem for many states, particularly the states in the region. We believe that a diplomatic solution has a chance of working here.
But if Kim Jong Il comes to the table, will he give in to U.S. demands?
I think that Kim Jong Il absolutely will negotiate. I think we don't know whether he's really willing to give up having nuclear weapons.
I think the best result we could expect is that he finds out that it's not in his interest to continue this very dangerous course that he's embarked on.
Once the North Koreans back down to the United States, so far as they're concerned, they follow a slippery slope towards regime change in North Korea.
In recent weeks, Kim Jong Il's stance toward the United States has become increasingly confrontational. It could be a tactical move, or perhaps this time, a sign of desperation.
Kim Jong-il's days may be numbered. He may be able to preserve the regime for the time being. There is no way they can maintain this kind of isolation for very much longer.
Is Kim Jong-il's North Korean empire due to fall? We may not have to look further than the movies.
One movie he very much liked was The Gladiator, which I thought was very ironic because it was from the kind of the decaying days of imperial Rome, in which someone plays the Caesar figure, and Kim Jong-il struck me very much as that kind of figure.